Hello Tracy, thank you for coming to speak to me today.
Pleasure, Bob.
Could you just start by giving me a bit of your background?
Yeah. I'm HR Director. I'm MCIPD qualified, so that means I have to follow a code of conduct that the Institute of Personnel Management set, and I worked as an HR Director for 20 years.
You kindly looked at the contract. What motivated you to look at the doctor's contract?
I think because I am passionate about the NHS and because I wanted to further understand what the issues were for both sides, I wanted to have a look at it. And for me, junior doctors being a key part of the workforce, for that to be right, it's important for every member of the public to know that is right, because we all at times could be a patient of the NHS.
And when you'd finished looking at the contract, what was the feeling you were left with?
Shocked, which I don't know why, because I sort of got to the stage where I think, could anything else shock me? But as soon as I looked at it and I'd read through, despite all the other issues that have been issues within the media for some of the junior doctors, the fundamental thing for me was that no junior doctor with that contract has employment rights.
If they sign this contract, it's unenforceable. They can't go to a court and have any chance of winning, in your view?
If everything goes hunky-dory and there's never a problem and they've never got a concern, then fine. But real life, as we know, cannot always be like that, and you do hit problems and you do hit concerns. I think if you went to a tribunal, the way that contract is configured, they'd say, well, hang on, the people you're trying to sue is not your employer, so you've no employment rights. I think, I don't think it's actually been proven now with the Chris Day case that he couldn't win his case because they were not his employer.
That's the whole point of a contract, isn't it? It's a document to present to a court in time of dispute. But from what you're saying, you were shocked that it didn't provide any protection for the employee.
It's the first thing the court would look at in terms of that relationship and to see who had there been a breach or not.
You mentioned to me earlier that in the contract it uses the term the employer. What's wrong with that?
It uses the term employer, but it doesn't define who that employer is. And as you know, there's lots of parties involved within that employment relationship. So you've got Health Education England. So are they the employer? And no, they're not, because very clearly at the start of the contract it says this contract is under the auspices of Health Education England. Well, that means that their role then is to support, oversee and monitor, but they are not your employer. When it talks about potentially other parties who could be the employer, such as a trust where a doctor may be placed during his rotation, it then talks about that junior doctor being on placement. So does that placement give you an employment right?
Tell me a bit more about placements.
So in placements that occur in trusts, most people will be under the assumption, because you've got a salary, because you've got defined hours of work, a job plan, you have to follow their rules, their policies and procedures. They can dismiss you if you don't. That gives them that employment status. Now, when you look at placement in employment law terms, that necessarily on its own does not give you that employment status. What needs to occur for it to have that employment status is to say that you've got future guaranteed permanent work. And as you know, the nature of how going through the training programme, you've not got that. So trusts are not the employer, and Health Education England, by saying it's under the auspices of, have got that get-out clause as well.
So if a doctor is on a placement, because that placement doesn't have attached with it promise of permanent future employment, then employment law doesn't apply
Absolutely
to that
not.
placement.
And I think the Chris Day case has proved that, absolutely, beyond doubt.
So if a doctor flags up a problem and he's on placement, he's got no protection.
No protection whatsoever.
And you mentioned Chris Day. We know that Chris Day's case has highlighted a problem, particularly with Health Education England, who, from his case, I understand, removed his training number after he'd raised concern. And I was actually in court with Chris Day when we heard the arguments made by Health Education England that they only had a tangential influence on a doctor's career. But we know that they interview doctors for the career, they appraise them every year, and clearly they have the power to remove their training number, yet they are not accountable in the law.
They're not. Like I said, that's a total get-out clause for them that currently the law has to listen to and accept because of the way that contract is defined. But if they say they only have that relationship, surely common sense would say, okay, then you have no right to take my training number.
We've heard from the BMA, they've been around the country doing roadshows and trying to persuade people of the merits of this new contract. And the issue about Health Education England has come up, and people have been reassured that it's no longer a problem.
That cannot be correct with that current contract in no way, shape or form. And what I can't comprehend, and I don't want to put directly to the BMA people who are saying that, is how can you say that? You are misinforming your members. As a medical defence organisation, that is reprehensible because that current contract does not resolve that problem.
So despite BMA reassurances, we can see no way that loophole Health Education England have at the moment has been fixed. Unless HEE change their stance about having only a tangential influence on a doctor's career, that situation remains unchanged.
It absolutely does.
Yeah. So another issue that has arisen is hospital trusts used to be facing very hefty penalties if they overwork doctors. And these penalties were a significant financial stick to prevent trusts misbehaving in this way. But now that's going to be replaced by a guardian system. And a guardian will be employed by the trust, accountable to the board, and we are being told this is a good arrangement. What are your views?
I don't think that's a good arrangement at all. Trusts in the main, because a lot of what they're judged on boils down to finances, quite sadly. I still think it should boil down to patient safety, but a lot of it is financial. Some of it should be, but I think there's an overemphasis on the finances. So that was a big disincentive to trusts. Regardless of what anybody did, said or whatever, they wanted those finances to be right. Currently, an HR director would, you could argue, why do you need a guardian? Shouldn't the HR director and the team have been doing that role? They obviously weren't, hence the need for this guardian. But the guardian's only got the same responsibilities, and they are reporting to somebody above them, and if they don't want to comply, they've still got the power over your career to tell you to do something different. And that then person has to make a choice, whether is it my career or do I do the right thing.
So in your experience, finances always come first, not patient safety?
Always.
And from what I understand, the guardian, if there is a penalty, is very small and it's kept by the trust.
How does that change behaviour?
Right, so this is some of us who've raised these concerns on the Junior Doctor Forum, on social media, have been dismissed by people who are supporting the contract, and actually members of the negotiating committee are trying to minimise the concerns we're raising. What do you think about the response we've had?
I think that's very poor, because my question to them would be, well, show me the evidence how this would work. The National Guardian already, didn't last very long in post. That's not got any powers whatsoever. So if that can't work, how can these local guardians work? I think to dismiss them without any evidence, again, is reprehensible. Show us why it would work and the difference, and they're not answering those questions properly.
Myself and other people who've spent a lot of time following what's going on in the NHS believe that junior doctors are being set up to be overworked. Other parts of the contract actually transfer more responsibility onto the junior doctor, for example, to report themselves as overtired. How do you think this will impact on patient care?
Hugely. For anybody to be overworked is a massive issue, especially when you're dealing with patient lives. So the fact that it could allow that to happen is a concern and shouldn't allow that. The fact then that junior doctor's got nowhere to go with that concern is an even greater risk to patient safety. The fact that if they do raise it, despite all that, with nowhere to go and no employment rights, they could lose a career over it, and therefore that discourages others to speak up. I think that just potentially for patient safety is a massive, massive issue.
When you've been working in the NHS and since you've been working for the charity, who are the people within the NHS who bring concerns to the HR?
It is normally the two key groups who can tell you anything that is going on within an organisation that is not right are your junior doctors, because they've got that fresh pair of eyes and they're there at the front line along with the nurses, and they are critical in highlighting any concerns. So the fact that they've got no employment rights to protect them if they want to do that is just like, it just is difficult to comprehend.
That's quite a powerful signal to the rest of the staff,
Yes,
isn't it?
it would silence the rest of the staff, because the fear that creates and the type of culture that creates, that is so powerful when it's people's livelihoods. And along with that, within this contract is a bit that talks about transfer of information. Now, how that is done within the NHS is through the electronic staff record.
Right.
So
we're talking about transfer of information regarding the employees, the doctors.
Yeah. So any concern that you've raised could go on that system. You go elsewhere and try to rebuild your career if it's been destroyed from that organisation. And as soon as you apply to another NHS organisation, that data will be transferred. So that trust would know you've raised concerns. They will know that you may have been put through a GMC practice hearing. They will know that you may have gone to a tribunal. They will even know that you may have took a compromise agreement. All of that information is passed on.
So this contract explicitly sets out arrangements to transfer employee data,
Yes.
which from what you're saying could be used against them, effectively blacklisting them.
Yeah.
The effect on the rest of the workforce if this contract goes through?
A junior doctor can have his career destroyed and not be able to work again. If you are, very moral and ethical about that, do you want to work so could we start to lose lots of staff because they get demotivated and disengaged by the fact that, because they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't, because they have a code of conduct that the GMC says they have to follow that says they have to do exactly that, but the career can be taken away if they do. So that's very demotivating for the workforce, and you could get people leaving, going abroad, working elsewhere. There is already a shortage in certain areas, so that's not good for the rest of the workforce.
The way the contract is set up is likely to have a negative impact on the workforce, actually drive doctors out.
It could do, yeah.
This fits into the part of the de-skilling agenda, the downskilling agenda, and more we're seeing different categories of health workers coming along, like physicians, associates and other categories, which are being developed to actually replace doctors. And a contract such as this, which is going to drive out doctors, remove protection from them, likely to make rota gaps worse, and the intensity of the work that they do more stressful, pushing them to burnout. This is not a very good recipe for a safe NHS, which we keep hearing from Jeremy Hunt and Simon Stevens. So it's completely contrary to the rhetoric we're getting from our NHS leaders.
I think so. I think, it, like you say, it just does de-skill the workforce, and we're losing people all the time, valuable people that we should be retaining.
Part of the Simon Stevens 5-year forward view talks about losing another potentially 17,000 beds across the country. It talks about reducing the number of full A&Es from 144 in 2013 down to between 40 and 70. That's almost a 50% reduction in A&Es. Now we have a contract which, if anything, will force more doctors out of the system. What do you think about that?
It can't be good. The pressure on the system is great, great already. To create more unsafe hospitals is not good for the patients, the public, the government. I don't even get why the government, it's not a good message. We need our NHS and we need it to be able to deliver safely.
One of the classic techniques, because I don't know if you agree, but we're in the midst of a privatisation. We're coming to the end of NHS privatisation, and one of the tactics required to privatise something is you have to make it look like it's failing. You have to restrict the funding. make the service fail, get people angry before you offer them the alternative, which will be private top-up insurance. And we have at the head of the NHS now a man called Simon Stevens. He spent the last 10 years working for United Health. United Health is one of America's biggest insurers. And while he was in United Health, he actually campaigned actively against universal health care, which was coming in under Obama. So this chap who's leading the NHS is a former insurance guy, and now we're seeing the mechanism set up to push doctors out of the NHS, to replace them by cheaper staff, and to shrink the NHS. So what we're getting is a perfect storm to lead for a reason for the public almost to demand something needs to be done. And this infrastructure is already being set up for this transition to an insurance-based system. And I'm afraid what I'm seeing in the junior doctors contract, and I'm sure the nurses contracts and consultants contracts and GPs contracts, is making staff more vulnerable and easier to get rid of. And I'm afraid that's where I see this contract proposal fitting in. But what you've told me today has been extremely useful, and it gives a different dimension. If you were a junior doctor, given all your experience of human resources and how people who raise concerns are treated, and how the current system works and how the system will work under the new contract, what would you do?
In what way? If I was asked to sign it?
If you were a doctor, yeah.
I couldn't sign it because it does in no way define me as an employee. And I know I would have no rights, and I have enough knowledge and experience to know when it goes wrong you need those employment rights. So it's not personally something I could sign.
Paying my fees to the BMA for the last 22 years, certainly in recent years, my care of my patients has become increasingly difficult. My job satisfaction is nosediving. We're working under a lot of pressure. The reason I've been motivated to try and raise awareness is because I don't want to leave a system behind me for younger generation of doctors, which is worse than when I came in, and that's what I see happening here. But I'm quite angry at the BMA for even having the cheek to put such a poor contract offer in front of their members. As a member of the BMA, how do you think they've been treated?
I think they've got a duty to inform their members exactly what that contract means for you. I've sort of been bemused by some of the arguments over pay because to me they're irrelevant. If you've no employment rights, you cannot take whoever for breach of contract. There's a medical defence organisation, I think that's pretty poor.
What should we be asking of our BMA leaders, the people who've negotiated such a contract?
The key question is, why have we no employment rights within that contract? Fundamentally, for any basis of a contract, should it not define who is the employer and who is the employee? And then if anything goes wrong, hopefully not in an ideal world, but we know we're not in that, where do we go? Have we then got the right to go to tribunal? And then you can focus on the rest of it, but why aren't they giving that advice?
So from what you've seen, this 82 page document, of what value is it for a doctor?
None whatsoever.
None
whatsoever. Yeah. All the power lies with Health Education England and the trust that you work with, and they've got get-out clauses all along. A contract should be in the interest of both parties to enable something to work.
Well, I know from my own point of view, from what I've learned looking at this contract, speaking to people as yourself, I've learned so much. I have lost a lot of trust in what the BMA have done, and I hope that people who watch this video will see from how you've clearly painted a picture of employment rights and the complete lack of employment rights in the contract, that they'll make the right decision and reject this contract.
It needs to be informed, and as long as they've got the information, then the choice is theirs. But without that information and without them being clearly informed and understanding what they're signing, then I think it's reprehensible to accept someone to sign it without knowing what they're signing.
Most of the junior doctors that I've spoken to who think this contract is worthwhile are seriously misinformed in my judgment.
Yeah. And therefore can you make that choice? And morally and ethically that's not right.
Thanks for that clear explanation. Thanks for all your help.
Thank you, pleasure.